Hey everybody, this is Professor Island, and today we're talking about critical perspectives, and specifically this is about African American cultural studies. Like many of the cultural criticisms, African American cultural studies focuses on how a particular segment of the population is going to translate works, and also in a lot of ways incorporates the language and the words of that culture back into both literary analysis and also including those works in the canon. Specifically, African American studies focuses on not only works written by African Americans, but also looks at the way that African Americans are portrayed in literature and how the African American response is going to affect how that work is read or translated. Specific things that are brought up with African American cultural studies has to do with, obviously, the Harlem Renaissance, in terms of the creation and the proliferation of a great number of well-respected and well-recognized writers within a cultural context that embodied the notion that this was definitely a definable, clear culture on its own, but also a reflection of the fact that this particular group was a vestige of American slavery, and also the progress of history through time in terms of how African Americans, very specifically as a group, have been either treated differently or have been perceived differently by the mainstream culture, differently from other minorities, and certainly within the context of their own belief system. A lot of things that would have to do with racism, about Jim Crow, about the new way that African American belief and culture get incorporated into the broad society as a reflection of how African Americans have affected music and literature and language and the like. And part of your analysis is going to be finding authors who discuss the belief systems and attitudes of African American portrayal in literature, as well as African American works themselves. Authors like Langston Hughes, Alice Walker, Tupac Shakur, these are all spokespersons and representatives of the culture, but the way that not only their work is translated, but also how the African American critics will translate material that is going to be portraying African Americans, whether the work is written by African Americans or not. And in fact, with any of these cultural responses, you're going to see that similarity. What you're looking for are valid voices that discuss African American beliefs and attitudes, and whether they're talking about your primary source directly or not, you then take those beliefs and attitudes and apply them back to the work that you're analyzing. Keep in mind there's a broad range of African American beliefs that have to do with region, they have to do with culture, they have to do with, well, obviously culture, but they have to do with socioeconomic status, educational status, belief system. For example, the translation of a work by Gwendolyn Brooks, We Real Cool, when it's translated from the perspective of the writer, in this case Gwendolyn Brooks, a well-educated, upper middle class, upper class African American woman who's looking at these young men who essentially are going to hang around and gamble and drink their lives away, and from her perspective end their lives early. Her translation of it, and the translation from that particular aspect of African American culture, is going to be different from the translation from someone who lives that environment who's also African American. You have to identify some of the specifics as to how you're applying this cultural belief. You're not treating it as if everyone believes the same thing. You have to narrow it down in a particular way to say, when translated from a cultural perspective of African Americans living in the inner city, dealing with some particular kind of socioeconomic group, whatever it happens to be, so that you've narrowed it down to the particular aspect of that culture that makes your analysis more cogent and less implying that everybody within the African American label all believes the same thing. Do your research and make sure you narrow your African American cultural response down to something that is consistent throughout your particular paragraph, and that will give you the material that you're looking for African American cultural response. Stay in touch.